So you want to make fresh bakery style artisan bread in your kitchen today with just a few simple ingredients and fail-proof methods. My name's Craig. I'm going to help you do that today. So remember with me, simple is best. Let's get cooking. The only things that you'll need today to get started are some flour, brown sugar, but you can just use regular sugar or honey, or you can just totally omit that. A little bit of salt, hot water, and some yeast. That's really it. So let's go ahead and let's start assembling all this, and pretty soon we're gonna have our bread. To start today, all we need is a bowl, and it can be a mixing bowl. I'm using just a big measuring bowl. Anything like that, as long as you're gonna be able to put something over it, because it's gonna have to rise in this container. The other nice thing about this is this whole thing happens in one bowl. It really keeps things simple. The first thing that we're gonna do though is, before we start measuring our flour, is get some hot water. So I'm gonna set this off to the side, and we're gonna go ahead and get our hot water. You can get it right out of the tap. Just run the tap for a few minutes, and the temperature that it comes into is gonna be fine. The water that I got and that I'm using is just 1.5 cups of hot water right out of the tap. That is plenty hot enough. You don't really wanna go any hotter than that, because we're gonna make this where our yeast is going to work. So we want enough heat to do that. I like to put 1 tablespoon of brown sugar into there. That is 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. And I put that in there because that's really gonna help the yeast. It gives the yeast really something to work with while it's in there. And that's optional. You don't have to do that. You can just leave that plain hot water if you want. And put that in there. Along with that, we need to put 1 teaspoon of salt. And we're gonna put 1 teaspoon of yeast. Now the yeast that I'm using is active dry yeast, but you are able to use really any yeast with this, whether it's bread machine yeast or if it's fast acting yeast, all of those will work just as good. And we just need 1 teaspoon of that as well. So I put that in right on top. Now, once you open the yeast, they say it's only good for 6 months. So you can use the packets, especially if you don't bake stuff a whole lot, you can use the packets. But when you have them, you should store them. It says in the refrigerator, but the freezer is better because it's gonna help preserve it. Once you get that all in there, just go ahead and mix that up. And we can set that off to the side once we get that all mixed up. I'm gonna set that over here. And then we go on to measuring our flour. Now, with flour, flour likes to pack down when it gets shipped. I always will say to you that I want you to use fluff flour. Fluff flour just means that you fluff it up a little bit before you measure it, because it does get packed in there. You don't have to sift it. People say, you'll see a lot of recipes call for sifting flour. There's really no sense in doing that. The whole purpose of that is so that it will fluff it up a little bit. So I just go straight with the fluffing. So just stir it around a couple times, loosen it up so it's not packed in there. And then you can either scoop right in and get it out or measure it out. So with me, I'm just gonna measure it out because it's actually a lot easier. And then get your knife, level it off. And we need 3 cups of flour for this recipe. So that's 1, it's already been fluffed. So 1, just make sure you're not packing it in there, because what'll happen is then people will say that their dough was too dry or it didn't come out right. And a lot of that has to do with just improper measuring. And it's not their fault. It's just that the flour gets packed down in there and then you end up measuring it incorrectly. And we do not want to do that. So then that is our 3 cups of flour. We're going to put that off to the side. Now that we have our 3 cups of flour, then all we have to do is, and we can do this right in the same bowl. We're going to leave it right in this bowl. I'm going to take that mixture that we had, stir it up a little bit, and then I'm going to pour that right in on top. It's literally that easy. Now, once you get that in there, then go ahead, and this is how you make your flour, or your dough rather. You just mix this together, and this is how you make the dough. You're gonna see it start to get a little thicker. And pretty soon, look at that. It starts making just a regular dough. Now, this is a sticky kind of dough. Make sure that you get all the way to the bottom and get all the flour mixed in. It's very easy for flour to get stuck down in the corners. But once you get that, you just stir that around and you can see how easy it is to stir. And that right there is our bread dough. Make sure it's mixed up good. You want to make sure everything's together so that it can work. Now, I just use a spoon, scrape this off, make sure I get all the dough off of there, because I don't want to get my fingers all sticky. It's kind of a mess. Okay, put that off to the side, and then you could just take, some people like to use a towel over the top. I just use a piece of saran wrap. Either way, it is perfectly fine. Once you get that, cut a piece of that, put it right over the top. Now, once we get that all covered, we're just gonna let that sit for 2 hours. And then after that, we will go ahead and do the next step. We'll see you back in 2 hours. As you can see, there's all these really great bubbles and it has risen and it's gotten quite big inside there. And so now we're gonna go ahead and finish it off. Okay, you're gonna just wanna go ahead and take that off. And just from moving it around, it has sort of dropped down a little bit, but let's go ahead and we're gonna sprinkle just a little bit of flour on top of this before we start pushing it down. And I like to use a scraper like this. This scraper I got, you're gonna see I'm a big fan of the restaurant supply store. I got this for, I think it was 99 cents there. But this dough is going to be very sticky. So you're gonna wanna flour your surface just a little bit. Have that spread out, and then go ahead and get your dough out on top of it. And wow, look at that. And you, boy, I wish you could be here to smell it. It has a real nice yeast smell to it, just like dough from the bakery. Once we get it out of there, you're gonna wanna use your scraper because this is, like I said, a very sticky dough. Just sprinkle a little bit of flour on top. And then we're gonna just wanna fold it over. This is sort of our substitute for kneading. And just fold it over like maybe 10 times. So is that like 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can see, look, even just barely touching it, it wants to stick to my fingers. Okay, now once you get it into a little pile like this, put it inside parchment paper. That is going to keep everything from sticking. That is definitely the best way to do it. So cut a piece that is going to fit inside your Dutch oven, which I already have over there. And I always try to make it look nice and rounded on the top. Because remember, whatever you see on the top, that's what's going to be on the top of your loaf whenever it's finished. So that paper is not cooperating. There we go. And it's going to feel like, oh no, it's going to stick. It will not, I promise. And we're just going to let it sit on the counter like this for 35 minutes. While that is sitting like that for 35 minutes, we're going to go turn on the oven and put our Dutch oven into it, our cast iron Dutch oven. And that's going to preheat. We want to make sure that that is preheated so that when we put this in, we can put the lid on and it's already set to go. It's already got the heat inside of it. Now, if you don't have a Dutch oven, you can go ahead and use a cookie sheet, just a plain old cookie sheet. Make sure that you put a piece of parchment paper. Well, we're going to leave this like this. And when we transfer this for cooking and for baking, we're going to put it right with the paper into whatever method we're using. I'm going to use the cast iron, but if you use a cookie sheet, you can put it right on top of a cookie sheet. The only catch with that is then you have to make sure that you put a pan of water underneath it and just fill up a tall glass and put some water underneath it because you want that steam. When we have the Dutch oven, that steam is already going to be trapped in there and doing the job for us. Okay, I'm going to go turn on the oven to 450 and preheat that, and I'm going to put the Dutch oven in first, then turn it to 450, and we'll be back in about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. Okay, the bread has been rising for 35 minutes. The Dutch oven has been in the oven preheating and the temperature is up to 450. We should be ready to pull that out, put this in, and start baking. Now, as you can see, because it is cast iron, it's smoking a little bit, and that's absolutely fine. It's doing that because of the seasoning on it. We're gonna go ahead and put this in. Parchment paper and everything, and you're just gonna go ahead and set this down into that Dutch oven. Just be careful because everything is quite hot. Now I'll put the lid on top and it'll be ready, and pretty soon we're gonna have bread. Okay, we are ready to get this bread out of the oven. Let's see what it looks like. It's been cooking for 35 minutes. And as you can see, the parchment paper is gonna brown, and that's okay. But when we get this out, then just be careful because everything's gonna be really hot. And then when we look inside, oh, look at that. That is the stuff right there. Now, a lot of people will say that the bread like makes noise and sings. And I think it does. If you listen, you can hear it. Look at that crust. That is just fantastic bread. I'm gonna get out my cooling rack right here. And using hot pads, because I'm telling you, that bread is hot. Gonna have to sort of scoop it out and then put it right over here. And boy, you can see that that is gonna be good. Now, as the bread is cooling off, you can listen. Do you hear it making those crackling sounds? Some people say that the bread is singing. Now, this bread has been cooking for 35 minutes. We've taken it out, put it on a cooling rack for 10 to 15 minutes. You want to do that to make sure that it has time to cool off, and also the bread will keep cooking a little bit inside. All that steam and all that heat is trapped inside of it, and it will keep cooking the whole way through. So you want to make sure you give it time to do that before you cut it open. The other thing is, before you take it out of the oven after that 35 minutes, some people like a little crunchier crust, and if you want to do that, all you have to do is take the lid off of it, put it back in the oven, and let it cook for another, I would say 5, 10, or even 15 minutes would be fine. I like the crust just like this without it extra browned on top. But I can tell you this, when you listen to the crunch from it. Do you hear that crust? Ugh, it has such a nice sound to it. And look, it just comes out perfect. Such a beautiful loaf of bread. And let's go ahead and cut it. Ugh, listen to that. And look, open that up inside and look at that bread. Oh, look at the steam coming out. That is a beautiful loaf of bread. You can use this for sandwiches, garlic toast, any of that stuff. So now I get to enjoy a delicious bite of this fresh bread. I mean, look at it. It's beautiful. And let's see how it tastes. Wow. With strawberry jelly and some butter on it. As you can see, all joking aside, I am really enjoying this bread. So I'm gonna let you guys go for now. But just remember that if you wanna make a loaf that looks this gorgeous and tastes this good, it's super simple. Just remember, keep it simple. Let's get cooking. And for now, we'll see you later. Enjoy. Bye.